On what was supposed to be a peaceful day at the beach, Samantha and her son found themselves in the middle of a confrontation that would change everything. Pause for a beat, then transition to tension building, close-up of Officer Reid walking toward Samantha. But sometimes, the smallest moments bring the biggest challenges. Cut to suspenseful music building as Officer Reid approaches. What happens when a racist officer crosses the line with the wrong person? Stay tuned as this mother fights for justice, and see how the story unfolds. Pause for a beat, then switch to a wider shot, showing the atmosphere intensifying as the conflict begins. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling content. You don't want to miss what happens next. The sun was high above the beach, its rays bouncing off the water and illuminating the golden sands, making the scene feel almost like a painting. It was a perfect summer day. The waves crashed gently along the shore as the heat of the afternoon began to settle over the bustling beach. People of all ages were scattered along the shoreline, some swimming, others lounging under umbrellas, and a few kids building sandcastles in the shallow waters. Among them was Samantha, a black mother of two, who had arrived at the beach to unwind with her youngest, Aiden, a spirited 7-year-old who had begged her all week to come to the beach. The decision had been easy. Samantha had been working tirelessly, trying to juggle her job as a nurse with the responsibilities of raising her children alone. Today was for them, and only them. Aiden, his bright eyes full of energy, was already sprinting towards the water, his little feet kicking up sand with every step. Samantha watched him, her heart light. She hadn't seen him this happy in ages. She smiled to herself, adjusting her sunglasses as she stretched out on her beach towel, a rare moment of peace finally settling over her. As the waves lapped at the shore, a figure in the distance caught her eye. A police officer, Officer Reid, was walking along the beach. He stood out, his uniform crisp and his sunglasses reflecting the sun. But there was something about the way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the crowd, that seemed out of place. He wasn't just strolling, he was watching, calculating. Samantha paid him no mind at first. After all, it was a public beach, and police officers were common, walking their beat, keeping things orderly. But then she noticed his eyes. He was staring directly at her. She squinted against the sun, trying to ignore the growing sense of discomfort that lingered in her gut. She shifted slightly, her focus going back to Aiden, who was now splashing around in the surf, laughing. Her son was the light of her life, and nothing could ruin this moment, nothing. But Officer Reid began to walk toward her, each step deliberate, his gaze still fixed on her and Aiden. Samantha's pulse quickened, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a routine patrol. She tried to remain calm, but the tension was rising in her chest. As the officer approached, Samantha slowly sat up, adjusting the towel beneath her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she felt it deep in her bones. Something was off. "Excuse me, ma'am." Officer Reid's voice rang out, cutting through the air with an unsettling sharpness. Samantha blinked, surprised by the sudden intrusion. "Yes," she replied, keeping her tone polite but wary. "I'm Officer Reid. I need to make sure everything is in order here," he said, his eyes narrowing as he glanced around. "This area is reserved for families, and I don't think you fit the profile." Samantha's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" Her voice was steady, but inside, she was fuming. Officer Reid stood tall, his posture rigid. He didn't back down, instead letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "You don't belong here," he said bluntly. "This beach is for families, for people who know how to respect the rules. I've seen people like you before, not really fitting in." Samantha's chest tightened as the heat of the moment began to rise. "Excuse me?" She stood up, her voice gaining strength. "I'm here with my son. We're not causing any trouble. You don't have any right to talk to me like this." The officer took a step closer, his expression hardening. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. People like you don't need to be in places like this. You're disrupting the atmosphere here." Samantha's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the blood rushing to her head, her anger building with every word he spoke. "I'm here because I'm a mother, taking care of my child. If you have an issue, you need to take it up with someone else. This is a public beach. You don't own it." The officer looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You don't belong here," he muttered almost to himself, as if the words had been rehearsed. Samantha's heart began to race. She was being targeted. This wasn't just a simple encounter, it was something deeper. She had experienced this before, the subtle racism that reared its ugly head when she least expected it, but this was different. This wasn't just an uncomfortable glance, This was a deliberate attempt to undermine her, to make her feel small, like she wasn't worthy of the same respect everyone else received. As she opened her mouth to respond, she felt a presence at her back. It wasn't just the weight of another person, but the energy of someone who understood exactly what was going on. She turned to see Derek, a man in his early 30s who had been nearby. He was a local, someone she'd seen around the neighborhood, but his reputation was what caught her attention. Derek was the kind of person who didn't back down, especially when it came to standing up for what was right. Derek wasn't just a bystander, he was a protector, and he wasn't about to let Officer Reid push Samantha around. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Derek's voice was calm, but there was a fire in it that made Officer Reid stop in his tracks. The officer turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he met Derek's gaze. Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her. Derek's presence was like a shield, his aura exuding confidence and authority. She could tell that he wasn't someone who would tolerate injustice. Officer Reid took a step back, but he didn't move away completely. His eyes flicked between Derek and Samantha. "I'm just doing my job," the officer muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He knew he had been caught, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Derek stepped forward, his body language unwavering. "I don't think your job involves harassing families enjoying a day at the beach. If you've got a problem with her, you'll have to take it up with me." The tension in the air was thick, a standoff between authority and justice. Officer Reid's face reddened as his fists clenched, but he took another step back, his eyes still fixed on Derek. "This isn't over," he spat before turning on his heel and walking away, his boots crunching in the sand with each angry step. Samantha let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She was shaken, but Derek's presence had diffused the situation. As the officer walked off, she turned to Derek, gratitude flooding her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice shaky. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Derek nodded, his expression serious but kind. "No one should ever have to face that alone. I've got your back. Let me know if I can proceed with..." The tension in the air lingered even after Officer Reid's departure. The beach, which had once felt like a safe haven for Samantha and Aiden, now felt like a battleground. Samantha tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but she couldn't ignore the sting of the officer's words. "You don't belong here." The phrase echoed in her mind, cutting deeper than any physical blow could. Aiden, still oblivious to the full weight of what had just transpired, tugged at her hand, pulling her back toward the water. "Mom, let's race to the waves. I bet I can beat you." Samantha forced a smile, squeezing his hand tightly. "Not right now, sweetie," she said, trying to push the bitter taste of the encounter from her mouth. "We're just going to sit here for a bit, okay?" Aiden pouted, but he didn't argue. Instead, he skipped back toward the water, his joy seemingly undeterred. Samantha watched him go, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her son, so full of life, would one day face the same challenges she had. It was inevitable, she knew. The world wasn't as kind to people like them, no matter how much love and care she poured into him. Her thoughts were interrupted as Derek approached, his steps deliberate but not rushed. He stopped a few feet from her, his posture relaxed but still commanding. "I've seen that officer around here before," Derek said, his voice low and measured. "He's trouble, but it's not just him. This beach, this whole town's got a history of folks like him." Samantha nodded, her eyes on Aiden, who was now splashing around in the shallow end, making tiny waves of his own. "I know," she said quietly, "but I didn't expect this today. Not here. Not now." Derek shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze following the path Officer Reid had taken. "People like that, they think they can control the space around them. They thrive on making others feel small, like they don't have a right to exist in places that aren't meant for them. But today, they didn't get to win." Samantha met Derek's eyes, a flicker of appreciation crossing her face. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." Derek gave her a nod, his lips curling into a small, reassuring smile. "It's nothing. I'm just looking out for what's right. You've got every right to be here, just like anyone else." She took a deep breath, letting the words settle in, but the weight of the encounter didn't lift easily. It clung to her, like a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. She had been pushed to the edge, but today, for the first time in a long time, someone had been there to pull her back. "I'm not the type to just let things slide," Samantha said, her voice firm now. "I don't know if it's the nurse in me, or the mom in me, but I'm done pretending things like this don't happen. I'm done staying quiet." Derek's gaze softened, his eyes glinting with approval. "You shouldn't have to stay quiet. It's time for people to start speaking up. The only way this town is going to change is if the ones who see what's wrong stand up." Samantha met his gaze, the realization dawning on her that this wasn't just about her momentary discomfort. It was about something bigger, a larger fight that had been brewing for far too long, one that she hadn't realized she was a part of until now. She stood a little taller. I'm going to make sure he doesn't get away with it. This isn't over. Derek raised an eyebrow, surprised by the resolve in her voice. You're not going to let him slide by, huh? Samantha shook her head, determination flickering in her eyes. No, I'm going to make sure he answers for it. Just then, Aiden came running back toward her, his face lit up with excitement. Mom, guess what? I found a seashell. Look, he held up a small, shiny conch, his joy contagious. Isn't it awesome? Samantha smiled, the warmth spreading through her chest. She knelt down to his level, taking the shell from his hand. It's beautiful, baby. You did a great job finding that. Derek chuckled softly, watching the interaction between mother and son. It was a small moment, a fleeting moment of happiness that he knew Samantha needed after everything that had happened. He looked at her and nodded toward the water. You're doing great, you know that? Samantha looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something more, something that she hadn't quite been able to place yet. But she wasn't going to dwell on it now. Thanks, I appreciate you. Derek smiled, the kind of smile that reassured her that everything was going to be okay, no matter how rough the road ahead might be. But as they stood there, the peacefulness of the beach still clinging to the air, Samantha couldn't ignore the feeling that something bigger was at play. Something was changing inside of her. She wasn't just a mother trying to protect her child. She was a force, and she was ready to take action. Suddenly, the sound of distant footsteps broke her train of thought. She turned to see Officer Reid walking back toward them, his strides quick and purposeful. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of 3 other officers were trailing, their uniforms crisp, but their presence menacing. The air around them seemed to crackle with tension as they walked toward Samantha and Derek. The officer in front, a younger man with a buzz cut, seemed eager to confront. Samantha's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat as she realized they weren't going to let this slide. They were coming for her, but this time she was ready. Stay here, Aiden, she said, her voice calm but firm as she stood to face the growing threat. Derek stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as the group closed the distance. What's going on, officer? He called out, his voice steady but challenging. Officer Reid sneered, his jaw clenched. You know exactly what's going on. She doesn't belong here. She's been warned. We don't need people like her bringing trouble to this place. Samantha stood tall, her fists clenching, ready to fight for her right to be here. This time, she wasn't alone. Let me know if I can continue with the tension between Samantha, Derek, and the group of officers had reached a boiling point. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to fade into the background as Officer Reid and his colleagues drew closer, their heavy boots crunching against the sand like a warning drumbeat. Samantha felt her heart thumping in her chest, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight back. Aiden was standing a few feet away, watching his mother and the officers. He didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but he could sense the change in the air. The way his mother stood tall, her posture rigid and unyielding, made him feel a sense of pride, even though he didn't fully comprehend what was going on. Aiden's voice was small but filled with concern. He looked up at her, his innocent eyes wide with uncertainty. Samantha turned to him, her face softening. Stay behind me, baby. Everything's going to be okay. She spoke with the kind of calm confidence she didn't even know she had, the words rolling off her tongue like a promise. She wasn't just protecting Aiden, she was protecting herself too. The years of silence, the years of swallowing her anger were finally coming to an end. Officer Reid stopped in front of her, his eyes scanning her face with disdain. I gave you a warning before. You don't belong here, and I'm done being polite about it, he sneered, his voice dripping with superiority. You and your kind don't have the right to enjoy these spaces. Now you can either leave peacefully, or we'll have to escort you off. Samantha took a slow, deliberate step forward. Her chest swelled with a mixture of anger and determination. This wasn't just about a beach day. It wasn't just about some officer who thought he could control the space around him. This was about a lifetime of being silenced, a lifetime of enduring this kind of treatment, and she was done. I'm not going anywhere, Samantha said, her voice low but unwavering. You're not going to intimidate me. You're not going to control me. Not today. Derek, standing just beside her, stepped forward as well, his presence an unspoken shield. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Samantha, his stance just as firm, just as defiant. This is a public beach. She has as much right to be here as anyone else. You're the one causing trouble here, not her. Officer Reid scoffed, looking Derek up and down as if dismissing him. I don't need to take advice from someone like you, he said, his tone dismissive. But the younger officer behind him shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between Reid and the others. The group of officers stood there, their collective weight pushing down on the air. But something was changing in the way they looked at Samantha and Derek. The force of their words and presence had shaken them, and now they were no longer sure of themselves. "You don't get it, do you?" Samantha continued, her voice gaining strength. "You're not the law here. You're just a man who thinks he can bully people around. But you don't know me, and you don't know us." The younger officer, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we should just let them go. They're not causing any harm." His eyes darted nervously between Officer Reid and the others, but his words were enough to make the group pause. Samantha felt a surge of hope, but she didn't let her guard down. Officer Reid shot the younger officer a venomous look, his nostrils flaring as he clenched his fists. "You're not in charge here," Reid spat. "I'm calling the shots. You want to back off, fine. But I'm not letting this slide. Not while I'm here." Derek turned to the younger officer, his eyes locking onto him with a sense of urgency. "You see what's happening here, right? This is about power and control. This is about someone using their badge to make people feel less than. But you don't have to go along with it." The younger officer hesitated, his jaw working as if he was wrestling with his own conscience. The others remained silent, watching the scene unfold. The sun beat down relentlessly, but for a moment it felt like the world had stopped moving. The air crackled with the potential for something to shift. "I don't have time for this," Officer Reid barked, shaking his head in frustration. "We're doing this the hard way then." He turned back to Samantha, his finger pointing accusingly at her. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace." The words hung in the air, a chilling threat that sent a ripple through the crowd on the beach. Samantha's blood ran cold, but her resolve didn't falter. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had been pushed aside, every person who had been told they didn't belong. "Disturbing the peace," Samantha repeated, her voice now a mix of disbelief and fury. "You're the one disturbing the peace, not me. I'm standing up for myself, and I'm standing up for my son. I'm not going anywhere." Aiden, who had been standing quietly behind her, finally stepped forward, his small voice clear but trembling. "Mom, don't let them hurt you," he said, his eyes wide with fear. Samantha's heart ached as she knelt down to his level, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "It's going to be okay, baby, I promise." Derek stepped in between them, his voice stern yet reassuring. "Nobody's hurting anybody, not while I'm here." For a moment there was a brief silence, then something shifted in the air. Officer Reid, who had been so sure of himself, seemed to hesitate. He looked back at the younger officer, then at his colleagues. They weren't with him anymore, not fully. They were divided, and that was the crack Samantha needed. Without another word, she turned to Derek and nodded. "Let's go, Derek. We're not letting them do this." Derek nodded firmly, his hand resting on her shoulder briefly before they began to walk toward the crowd, ready to leave the officers behind. But as they walked, Samantha's mind raced. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. She was going to make sure that Officer Reid paid for what he had done, not just for her but for everyone who had ever been treated like this. Samantha and Derek walked away from the officers, the tension still hanging thick in the air. As they made their way to the edge of the beach, Samantha glanced over her shoulder at the group of officers. Officer Reid was standing there, his face twisted in frustration, his fingers twitching at his sides as though he was itching for a confrontation. The younger officer who had hesitated looked torn, but he didn't move. The others remained silent, unsure of how to proceed. "Let's keep walking," Derek said, his voice calm but firm. He glanced over at Samantha, noticing the way her shoulders were tight with both anger and fear. "This isn't over, but you don't need to deal with that nonsense anymore." Samantha nodded, but her mind was already racing. The encounter was far from finished. She wasn't going to let Officer Reid get away with using his badge to intimidate her, and she definitely wasn't going to let him think he could control her life in this town. The sound of the waves seemed distant now, drowned out by the pounding of her heart and the rush of adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Aiden, still holding her hand, looked up at her with concern in his eyes. "Mom, are we going home now?" he asked softly, his voice small and uncertain. Samantha crouched down to meet her son's gaze, forcing a smile. "No, sweetie, we're not going home just yet. I promised you we'd have a good time today, and we will." She took a deep breath, looking around. They were at the far side of the beach now, away from the crowd, but the ocean stretched before them, endless and free. They didn't need to leave. But the presence of those officers, especially Officer Reid, gnawed at her, and she knew this wasn't something she could ignore. "I'm sorry you had to see all that, Aiden," she said, her voice tight. "That wasn't how it should have gone." Aiden blinked up at her, his innocent face filled with confusion. Why did the man talk to you like that? You didn't do anything wrong. Samantha swallowed the lump in her throat, looking away for a moment as a wave of emotion swept over her. This wasn't something she wanted to explain to him yet. He was too young to understand the depths of what had just happened, but soon he would be old enough to face these issues on his own. It was a reality she wasn't ready for, but she couldn't avoid it forever. "We're going to talk about it later, okay?" Samantha said, standing up and brushing the sand from her hands. "Right now, I want you to have fun. You've got a whole beach to explore." Aiden's face brightened at the mention of the beach, his previous concerns vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. He ran back toward the water, calling over his shoulder, "I'm going to build a bigger castle this time, Mom." Samantha watched him go, her heart swelling with love and a deep protective need to ensure that his future would be different from hers. She would fight for it, even if it meant standing up to the system, standing up to people like Officer Reid. Derek turned to her, noticing the weight in her eyes. He understood. He didn't need her to explain it all. "You're not alone in this," he said simply, his voice steady. Samantha nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Derek had been there for her, and in that moment, she realized how much she appreciated his presence. He wasn't just a bystander, he was someone who understood the fight, someone who wasn't afraid to speak up when it mattered most. "We need to make sure the town knows what happened today," Derek continued. "This can't slide. People like him think they can get away with things like this, but we can't let them." Samantha looked at him, her eyes narrowing with determination. "You're right, we can't let it go. I'm going to make sure they know exactly what happened. I won't stop until he's held accountable." "Good," Derek said, his face resolute. "We'll go to the press, the local leaders, anyone who will listen. We'll make sure everyone knows what kind of officer he really is." Samantha felt the fire inside her ignite once again. Officer Reid had crossed a line today, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. But as much as the idea of taking action felt like the right thing to do, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this wouldn't be an easy fight. In a town like this, things were never simple. As they stood there, staring out over the water, a small voice from behind them interrupted their thoughts. "Excuse me," a woman's voice called out. "Are you Samantha?" Samantha turned to see a woman in her mid-30s walking toward them. She was dressed in a sun hat and a sundress, her dark skin glowing under the sun. Her expression was serious, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of understanding. "Yes," Samantha replied, her guard instinctively going up. The woman took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to Derek for a moment before settling on Samantha again. "I saw what happened with Officer Reid. He's done this before. He's harassed other families here too. You're not the first." Samantha's stomach sank as she looked at the woman, trying to process what she was hearing. "What do you mean? He's done this before?" The woman nodded, stepping closer. "I know some people who've been targeted by him. He picks people out, makes them feel small, like they don't have a right to exist in places like this. He's done it to other black families too." Derek stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have names, stories, proof?" The woman hesitated but then nodded. "I've got some names, but it's not just about the families. It's about the system protecting him. He's got connections, people who look the other way, but you've got to make this public. The more people who know, the harder it'll be for them to ignore it." Samantha's heart pounded as she realized the scope of what she was up against. This wasn't just about one officer, it was about a system that allowed people like him to get away with this behavior. "I'll do it," Samantha said, her voice filled with conviction. "I won't back down. This stops now." The woman smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm with you. You don't have to do this alone." Samantha looked at Derek, and he gave her an encouraging nod. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. "Let me know if I can continue with." The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the beach. The crowds had thinned out, leaving only a few scattered groups of people who seemed to be enjoying the last moments of daylight. But for Samantha and Derek, this was just the beginning. The battle they were about to fight would be far from easy, but it was one they had to face. They had gathered evidence. The woman who had approached them earlier, along with a few others who had experienced similar harassment, had agreed to testify and share their stories. Derek, always resourceful, had already reached out to a local journalist he knew who had a reputation for exposing corruption in the town. This story was going to hit the press, and it would hit hard. But before they could begin their journey to make it public, they needed to confront Officer Reid. Samantha had made up her mind. This wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about exposing the truth and ensuring that no one else had to suffer at the hands of a man who wore a badge but used it for his own twisted sense of power. As the sun dipped lower, Samantha and Derek found themselves standing outside the town's police station. The building was an old brick structure, its windows grimy and weathered, much like the town itself. This was where everything would go down. "You ready for this?" Derek asked, his voice low and steady. His eyes were filled with a quiet determination, the kind that told Samantha he had been through battles of his own. Samantha took a deep breath, her nerves fluttering in her chest, but she stood tall, the weight of her decision settling in. This wasn't just about her. This was about Aiden, and every other child who would grow up in a world where people like Officer Reid could tear families apart with a smile and a badge. "I'm ready," she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. "Let's do this." They walked through the heavy doors of the police station, the smell of stale coffee and old paperwork greeting them as they entered. The receptionist, a bored-looking woman who barely glanced up from her desk, glanced at them. "Can I help you?" "We need to speak to Officer Reid," Derek said, his tone businesslike. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Reid? He's not in right now. You want to leave a message?" Samantha's stomach tightened. They were so close, but they needed to see him, confront him face to face. She couldn't let him think he could get away with this again. "I'm not leaving until I talk to him," Samantha said, her voice calm but unwavering. The receptionist seemed to consider this for a moment before sighing and picking up the phone. "Fine, I'll let him know you're here, but don't expect him to come running." They waited in the small lobby, the silence between them heavy. Samantha's mind raced with everything she wanted to say to Reid. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she couldn't back down. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. Minutes later, the door to the back office opened, and Officer Reid stepped out. His expression was as cold as ever, but there was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes when he saw the two of them waiting. "What is it now?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. Samantha stood up, her jaw tight. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. Reid stepped forward, trying to tower over them, but Samantha wasn't intimidated. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't afraid of anyone who used their power to hurt others. "I don't know what you think this is about, but you've crossed the line," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I've had enough of your bullying, and I'm not backing down." Reid's eyes flicked to Derek, who was standing beside her, his arms crossed, his gaze unyielding. The officer's face twisted in a sneer, but it faltered when he saw the determination in Samantha's eyes. "What are you going to do?" he sneered. "You think you can take me down? You think I'm going to lose my job over you? You're nothing." Samantha's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. "No, I'm not nothing, and neither are the people you've harassed. We've already gathered everything we need. We have witnesses, evidence, and a journalist who's ready to expose everything. Your actions today have consequences. You won't get away with this." The color drained from Officer Reid's face, but he tried to cover it up with a gruff laugh. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just some woman with a sob story." Samantha stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a fire he couldn't extinguish. "I'm not just a woman with a sob story. I'm a mother, and I'm done being quiet. You're going to answer for what you did." There was a long, pregnant pause as the two of them locked eyes. Reid stood there, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for something to say, but the words didn't come. The realization was settling in. He wasn't in control anymore. Finally, he broke the silence. "You don't know what you're up against." Samantha's smile was small but triumphant. "Actually, I do. I've been fighting this fight my entire life." Just then the door to the station opened again, and the local journalist Tina walked in with her camera crew. The woman had been waiting for the moment to get the footage they needed. She was a small but fierce figure, a reporter who had long been committed to exposing the truth, even when it wasn't easy. Tina walked up to them, her eyes scanning the room. "Is this the man who's been terrorizing the community?" she asked, her camera crew immediately beginning to roll. Reid's face turned a shade of red that rivaled the setting sun. He glanced nervously between Samantha, Derek, and Tina, but there was nothing he could do now. The truth was out. His power was slipping away. "I suggest you talk to your superiors," Samantha said, her voice cold, "because the only thing you're going to be facing now is the consequences of your actions." With one last defiant look, Officer Reid turned and stormed out of the room. The sound of his heavy boots echoed in the silence, but Samantha didn't feel fear. She felt relief, knowing that justice was within reach. As the camera crew began their interviews with the witnesses, Samantha and Derek shared a quiet moment of understanding. They had done it, they had fought back, and they had won. Samantha turned to Derek, her face breaking into a smile for the first time in what felt like forever. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done this without you." Derek smiled back, his eyes warm. "You didn't have to do it alone."